He thought he had left the past behind, until he saw her again under the worst possible circumstances. Pregnant and wearing a cleaning uniform, she carried more than just a child. She carried forgotten truths. A life of luxury and power began to crumble with a single glance. And what came to light after that was far more than he ever imagined. Before you dive into this unbelievable story, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our heartfelt stories. In the gleaming lobby of the Grand Palace Hotel, one of the most luxurious in the city, Henry Mendoza walked with the posture of someone accustomed to occupying prestigious spaces. At 45, the real estate entrepreneur displayed an impeccably tailored suit and a watch worth more than the annual salary of many of the staff who discreetly observed him. By his side, Victoria Price, his current companion, a striking 32-year-old woman with perfectly styled hair and a dress that accentuated every curve of her sculpted body, smiled with the confidence of someone who had conquered one of the most coveted men in high society. "The cocktail party starts at 9, darling. I think we should arrive a little late, to make the right impression," whispered Victoria, adjusting the diamond bracelet on her wrist. Henry smiled, nodding in agreement. This was just one of many charity events that served as a showcase for new business and consolidation of his public image. After 3 years of a relationship with Victoria, he had learned to value every nuance of these social games. "Let's go upstairs." "I want to review some documents first," he replied, guiding her toward the private elevators that led to the presidential suites. It was at that moment that the soft sound of wheels gliding across polished marble caught his attention. A cleaning cart approached from the side corridor, pushed by a staff member in a navy blue uniform. There was something familiar about that silhouette, something that made Henry unconsciously slow his pace. When the employee turned to organize some products on her cart, Henry felt as if time had frozen. The air escaped from his lungs and he stopped abruptly, causing Victoria to look at him strangely. "What is it, Henry?" she asked, following his gaze. There, less than 30 feet away, was Helen Castle. The same Helen who had been his wife, there for 8 years. The woman with whom he had built the foundations of his real estate empire. The brilliant university professor he had left behind when his career took off and new doors opened. Doors that led him to Victoria. Helen looked like a different person. Her hair, once always impeccable, was tied in a simple bun. Her face, without makeup, revealed soft, dark circles. But what really shocked him was the obvious bump under the hotel uniform. Helen was visibly pregnant. For a devastating instant, their eyes met. There was no hatred in hers, as he might have expected, no resentment. There was only a quiet acknowledgement, followed by an almost imperceptible nod, as if he were just another guest before she continued her work, pushing the cart down the corridor. "Henry, is everything all right?" insisted Victoria, pulling him by the arm. Yes, let's go upstairs," he replied automatically, but his mind was elsewhere. In the presidential suite, while Victoria prepared for the event, taking a long, relaxing bath, Henry couldn't concentrate on the documents. The image of Helen, pregnant and pushing a cleaning cart in a hotel where he paid thousands for a single night, tormented him. With slightly trembling hands, he picked up the phone and dialed Richard, his personal assistant and trusted man for more than a decade. "I need information about Helen Castle, everything you can find out about her current situation, where she lives, where she works, financial situation, everything." "Helen, your ex-wife." The surprise in Richard's voice was evident. "Exactly. And, Richard, I want this yesterday. It's urgent." Hanging up the phone, Henry approached the panoramic window. From up there, the city looked like a carpet of lights, all within his reach. For 3 years, he had convinced himself that he had made the right choice in leaving Helen. His empire had grown exponentially since then. Victoria, with her connections and business acumen, had proven to be a much more suitable partner for his ambitions. But now, something was breaking inside him. A restlessness he hadn't felt in years. He remembered the quick and seemingly amicable divorce, how Helen hadn't fought for what she deserved, accepting a house and compensation that by his standards today seemed like crumbs. At the time, he considered that proof that she understood the marriage had naturally come to an end. When Victoria emerged from the bath, she found Henry distant, lost in thought. "You better hurry, darling. We have to keep up appearances, remember?" The cocktail party proceeded like a well-rehearsed play. Henry smiling, shaking hands, closing deals with a simple toast. Victoria dazzling at his side, whispering names and strategic information in his ear before each new introduction. But his mind wandered through the hotel corridors, imagining Helen cleaning sweets, carrying the weight of a pregnancy, while he savored champagne and canapes that cost the equivalent of several days of her current work. Back in the suite after the event, his phone vibrated. It was Richard. "I have the information you requested, sir. Send it by email now and call me in 5 minutes to discuss." The email arrived almost instantly. The findings were disconcerting. Helen now lived in a small rented apartment in a neighborhood far from downtown. The house she had received in the divorce had been sold 2 years ago, apparently to cover debts and medical expenses. But what really surprised him was discovering that Helen had been fired from the prestigious university where she taught economics. About 2.5 years ago, shortly after their divorce. When Richard called, Henry got straight to the point. Why was she fired from the university? Helen was one of the most respected professors at that institution. There was an uncomfortable silence on the other end of the line. "Sir, according to my sources, there was external pressure. A suggestion that her continued presence there would be but inconvenient for certain important investors at the university." Henry felt a chill run down his spine. "What investors?" Another silence. "The Mendoza Price Foundation, sir, right after the announcement of your substantial donation to the new research center, the Mendoza Price Foundation." His foundation with Victoria, a foundation he had created, but whose administration he had left largely in her hands while he focused on real estate business. "And what about the pregnancy?" he asked, feeling his throat dry. "From what I could gather, she's in her 7th month. She's been working at the hotel for about 5 months. Before that, she went through various temporary jobs. It seems she's been facing difficulties returning to the academic field since her dismissal." After hanging up, Henry remained motionless for long minutes. Guilt, a feeling he rarely dealt with, began to eat away at him from the inside. He remembered a casual conversation with Victoria shortly after the divorce when she mentioned that it would be complicated to maintain contact with Helen in the same social circles. He remembered having absently agreed when Victoria suggested that perhaps it would be better to create some professional distance between Helen and the institutions they supported. At the time, busy with the expansion of his business and intoxicated by his new life with Victoria, he hadn't questioned the implications of those words. Now the pieces fit together in a way that made him nauseous. "Coming to bed, darling?" Victoria's voice interrupted his thoughts. She had exchanged her dress for a red silk nightgown and was watching him with a calculated smile. "You seem tense. Let me help you relax." Henry forced a smile, but when she approached to kiss him, the image of pregnant Helen pushing that cart returned with full force. "I need to resolve some things first," he said, gently pulling away. "Go ahead. Don't wait up for me." When Victoria finally fell asleep, Henry silently left the suite. He needed to find Helen, needed to understand what had really happened in the last 3 years. More than that, he needed to know whose child she was carrying. And as he descended in the service elevator, looking for an employee who might give information about Helen's shift, Henry Mendoza, one of the most powerful men in the city, felt strangely vulnerable, as if he were about to discover truths that could shake the carefully constructed structures of his perfect life. "She left about half an hour ago, sir." The night shift supervisor looked suspiciously at Henry, who clearly didn't belong in the hotel's service area. "Helen isn't in trouble, is she? She's one of our best employees." "No, not at all," Henry hastened to reply. "We're long-time acquaintances. I saw her today and just wanted to talk." The woman slightly softened her expression but still maintained a protective air. "She usually takes the 4:37 bus at the employee exit. If you hurry, you might catch her at the stop. Henry quickly thanked her and headed to the back exit of the hotel. The night was damp, with a fine drizzle that dramatically contrasted with the climate-controlled and antiseptic environment of the Grand Palace. He looked around, locating the bus stop about 50 yards away. A solitary figure waited seated, and even from a distance he recognized Helen. He approached slowly, uncertain about how he would be received. When he was just a few steps away, Helen looked up from her cell phone and saw him. She showed no surprise, as if somehow she had expected this moment. "I figured you would come," she said, in a calm voice that he didn't recognize. It wasn't the same expressive Helen with whom he had shared 8 years of his life. "Can we talk?" asked Henry, feeling strangely displaced in his designer suit, while she wore the simple hotel uniform, covered by a wool coat already worn from use. "The bus arrives in 10 minutes, she replied, indicating the bench beside her, "and I'm quite tired." He sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. Up close, he could clearly see the pregnancy bump, more pronounced than he had initially noticed. His eyes lingered there for a moment, and Helen noticed. "7th month," she said, running her hand over her belly with an instinctive tenderness. "It's a girl." Henry felt his mouth go dry. "Helen, I didn't expect to find you like this." A sad smile formed on her lips. "Working as a hotel maid where you host your new companion? Or pregnant?" "Both," he admitted. "What happened to your job at the university?" Helen observed him for a few moments, as if measuring her words. "Do you really not know, or are you just testing to see if I discovered the truth?" The question hit him like a punch. "What are you talking about?" 2 weeks after our divorce was finalized, I was called in by the dean. He was visibly embarrassed, but said the university needed to make adjustments to the faculty due to new guidelines from the main donors. Coincidentally, your foundation with Victoria had just made the largest donation in the institution's history. Henry felt his stomach sink. "Helen, I swear I didn't know about this. Victoria manages the foundation. I just signed the checks," she completed. "And never questioned why your ex-wife was fired right after a generous donation. Curious, isn't it?" Shame invaded him. It was true. He had completely distanced himself from his previous life, immersed in new projects and intoxicated by growing success. He never stopped to check what had happened to Helen after the divorce. "It wasn't just the university," she continued with a controlled voice. "Somehow my name was tarnished in all the academic circles in the city. Rumors about misappropriation of research funds, improper relationships with students. Nothing. That could be proven, but enough to make me radioactive to any respectable institution. I had nothing to do with that," Henry stated, feeling indignation grow. "Why would I do something like that?" "Not you, Victoria." Helen adjusted her coat over her shoulders. "She wanted to ensure I completely disappeared from your life. A respected university professor might eventually cross your path at events, receptions, conferences. A hotel maid wouldn't." Henry remained silent, digesting that information. He remembered how Victoria occasionally mentioned that it was better to keep distance from certain people from the past, and how she had subtly distanced him from old social circles shared with Helen. "And the baby?" he finally asked, looking at her belly. Helen took a deep breath. "Remember that night, a month after the divorce, when you came to pick up the last documents at the house that was ours?" The memory returned like a flash. He had gone alone, deliberately choosing a time when he knew Victoria would be busy. Deep down, he wanted to see Helen one last time, perhaps to make sure he had made the right choice. They ended up drinking wine, reminiscing, and in an emotional impulse, shared one last night together. A farewell he had never mentioned to Victoria. "It's impossible," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "That was 7 months ago," Helen completed. "And before you ask, yes, I'm sure it's yours. There's been no one else since then." The bus appeared, turning the corner, its headlights illuminating Helen's face. She stood up with some difficulty. "Why didn't you come to me?" he asked, standing up too. "Why didn't you tell me?" "And what would you have done, Henry? Abandoned your perfect new life? challenged Victoria. You didn't even question when she orchestrated my exit from the university. Why would I believe you would care about a pregnancy? The bus stopped in front of them, doors opening with a hiss. I need to go, she said, taking a step toward the vehicle. Wait! Henry gently held her by the arm. Can we talk more? Tomorrow. I need to understand all of this. Helen looked at his hand on her arm and then at his face. Palm Avenue 237, apartment 15. It's a simple building in the south sector. I'll be home after 2 in the afternoon. Gently freeing herself, she boarded the bus. Henry remained standing at the stop, watching the vehicle move away under the drizzle, carrying the woman who was once his wife and the daughter whose existence he had just discovered. On the way back to the hotel, his mind was racing. That child was his. And if Helen was telling the truth, Victoria had deliberately ruined his ex-wife's career out of pure social calculation. He wondered what else he didn't know about the woman with whom he had shared his life for 3 years. When he silently entered the presidential suite, Victoria was sleeping deeply, or at least pretending to sleep. Henry observed her for a long moment, seeing her in a new light. The stunning beauty that had captured him now seemed like a facade for something much colder and more calculating. The next morning, while they had breakfast on the suite's terrace, Henry maintained a facade of normality, discussing appointments and meetings as if nothing had changed. But internally, he studied every expression, every gesture of Victoria, looking for signs of the manipulator that Helen had described. I'll need to take care of some personal matters this afternoon, he commented casually. Personal matters? Victoria raised an eyebrow, without taking her eyes off the tablet screen where she was reviewing news. What kind of matters? Nothing important. Just a visit to an old acquaintance who's having health problems. Victoria observed him over the rim of her coffee cup. An old acquaintance? Someone I know? No, someone from college days. She seemed to accept the explanation, but Henry noticed a suspicious gleam in her gaze. Victoria had always been excessively curious about his movements, something he had previously interpreted as caring interest, but which now took on darker contours of control. At 2 in the afternoon, Henry parked his imported car in front of a modest building on Palm Avenue. The contrast between the luxury vehicle and the simple surroundings attracted curious glances from local residents. He felt uncomfortably conscious of his expensive suit and Italian shoes as he climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The building had no elevator. He knocked lightly on the door of apartment 15. Helen opened it, wearing simple house clothes, her hair loose framing her makeup-free face. Even so, there was a natural beauty about her that reminded him of what had initially attracted him years ago. Come in, she said, making space. It's not what you're used to, but it's clean and cozy. The apartment was small, but organized, with the care of someone who values every inch. The living room combined with an American-style kitchen, and Henry could see only 2 doors that he assumed led to the bedroom and bathroom. In one corner, there was a crib still being assembled, and some boxes with baby items. Would you like some coffee? Offered Helen, heading to the kitchen. Yes, thank you. While she prepared the drink, Henry noticed the photographs on the simple shelf. Most were of Helen in various landscapes, some with people he didn't recognize. But one photo in particular caught his attention, Helen next to a man of approximately 35, both smiling in front of a bookstore. Who is he? He asked when she returned with 2 cups of coffee. Helen followed his gaze to the photograph. Daniel Adams, a former student of mine, now an assistant professor at State University. One of the few people who stood by me when the rumors started. Henry felt a pang of jealousy which surprised him. He didn't have that right, not after everything. Are you friends? Helen cut him off, sitting down with some difficulty on the sofa. He knows about the pregnancy, about you being the father, about everything. It was Daniel who helped me get some temporary jobs when no university would accept me anymore, and who recommended me for the hotel when he learned I needed something more stable because of the pregnancy. Henry nodded, sitting in an armchair facing her. Helen, about what happened at the university, I really didn't know. I never asked or suggested that you be fired. But you also never wondered how I was doing after we separated, did you? There was no accusation in her voice, just observation. I thought it would be easier for both of us to move on without contact, he admitted. It was selfish of me. It was convenient, she corrected, for you and Victoria. Helen took a sip of coffee before continuing. When I was fired, I tried to contact you. I called your office several times. Your secretaries always said you would call back, but that never happened. Henry frowned. I never received any messages from you. Exactly, said Helen with a sad smile. After a while I understood the game. Your new companion had created a sanitary cordon around you. Nothing from your past that she didn't approve of could reach you. A heavy silence settled between them. Henry processed it all, trying to reconcile the polished and sophisticated image of Victoria with the calculating manipulator emerging from these revelations. And the baby, he finally said, looking at Helen's belly. Why did you decide to go through with the pregnancy, even under such difficult conditions? Helen ran her hand over her belly with an instinctive affection. Because after losing everything, my career, my home, my reputation, this child became my hope. Something entirely mine that no one could take away. Not just yours, Henry observed softly. My daughter too. Helen stared at him intensely. And what does that mean to you, Henry? Are you prepared to publicly acknowledge her, to confront Victoria, to explain to high society that you'll have a daughter with the hotel maid who used to be your wife? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Henry realized he was at a crucial point in his life, a moment of choice that would define who he really was. Before he could answer, his cell phone vibrated insistently. It was Richard, his assistant. I need to take this, he said, rising and heading to the small balcony of the apartment. Richard's voice sounded urgent. Sir, I think we have a problem. Ms. Price asked for access to your personal computer today, claiming she needed some foundation documents. When I questioned which documents exactly, she became quite irritated and said you had authorized it. Henry felt a chill run down his spine. His computer contained emails, search history, including the recent investigations about Helen. I didn't authorize anything like that. Where is she now? She left about half an hour ago. Said she was going to meet you. Panic began to set in. Did she ask where I was? Not directly, but she asked to verify your location through the company car's GPS. Henry quickly hung up and returned to the apartment. Helen was watching him with concern. I need to go, he said hastily. Victoria may be on her way here. Helen's face paled. How would she know where I live? My GPS, my search history. She's more cunning than I thought. At that moment, as if to confirm his fears, the apartment's intercom rang shrilly. Helen answered with trembling hands. Apartment 15? There's a lady named Victoria Price down here wanting to come up. Says it's important, informed the doorman's voice. Helen and Henry exchanged alarmed looks. The game of appearances was over. It was time to face long-buried truths. Tell him she can come up, Henry instructed after a moment of hesitation. Helen looked at him with astonishment. Are you sure? I don't know if it's a good idea in my condition. Henry nodded firmly. Better we face this now, together. Helen took a deep breath and responded to the intercom. You can let her up, Mr. Johnson. The minutes that followed seemed like an eternity. Helen sat on the sofa, instinctively adjusting her blouse over her prominent belly. Henry remained standing, positioned between the door and Helen, as if to protect her from what was to come. 3 precise knocks on the door announced Victoria's arrival. Henry opened it, finding her impeccably dressed in a grey executive suit, with a perfectly controlled expression, except for her eyes which shone with an icy fury. Darling, she said with a tense smile. I was worried when I found out you were visiting. Such peculiar neighborhoods. Without waiting for an invitation, Victoria entered the apartment, her eyes scanning the environment with barely disguised disdain until they landed on Helen. Well, well, what a touching reunion, she commented, her tone falsely sweet. The pregnant ex-wife and the remorseful husband, almost a Mexican soap opera cliché. Henry closed the door with more force than necessary. How did you find me, Victoria? She shrugged with studied elegance. Did you really think it would be difficult? Your GPS, your search history. You leave digital traces everywhere, darling. The real question is, why are you here, hidden from me? I'm not hidden. I'm trying to understand some things, he replied, keeping his voice calm. Like, for example, why Helen was fired from the university right after our donation. Victoria laughed, a crystalline and cold sound. Business, my love, just business. A university doesn't need two specialists in the same field, especially when one of them is the inconvenient ex-wife of the largest donor. You had no right. Helen intervened, standing up with some difficulty. You destroyed my career, my reputation. I had every right, Victoria cut in, taking a step toward her. Henry needed a partner equal to his position, not a mediocre university professor stuck in the past. I did what was necessary to protect our interests. Our interests or yours? Questioned Henry, positioning himself beside Helen. Victoria stared at him with surprise, as if only now realizing that he wasn't on her side in that confrontation. Don't be naive, Henry. Everything we've built over the last 3 years required sacrifices. Some more unpleasant than others. Her gaze returned to Helen, descending to her prominent belly. And I see that someone has been busy since then. Who's the lucky one? The silence that followed was dense. Helen kept her chin up, without averting her gaze. It was Henry who answered, I am the father. The words fell like a sentence in the small apartment. Victoria's perfectly made-up face registered a series of emotions in rapid succession: surprise, disbelief, fury, and finally, calculated control. Impossible, she declared. You've been divorced for over 2 years. There was one last encounter, admitted Henry, a month after the divorce. Victoria narrowed her eyes, processing the information. And why am I only hearing about this now? Why did you... She pointed at Helen. Wait until you were about to give birth to appear with this convenient story. I didn't appear with anything, Helen defended herself. It was chance that brought us face to face yesterday at the hotel. I didn't even want Henry to know. Oh, sure, Victoria said ironically. Getting a job exactly at the hotel where we are known to stay was pure coincidence. Don't make me laugh. It was Daniel who recommended me for the position, explained Helen wearily. He didn't know you were frequent guests. Daniel? The name seemed to awaken something in Victoria. Daniel Adams? The assistant professor at State? Helen nodded, confused by the reaction. A dangerous smile formed on Victoria's lips. Interesting. Very interesting. She turned to Henry. You naive fool, don't you see this is all a setup? Helen and her professor friend planned every detail. What are you talking about? Demanded Henry. Think. Helen loses her job, loses status, and magically reappears pregnant with the millionaire businessman's baby. It's the oldest trick in the book. Helen let out an incredulous laugh. If it were a trick, I would have looked for you in the first month, Henry, not waited 7. Maybe you were just waiting for the perfect moment, suggested Victoria, walking around the apartment. Maybe you needed to look like the perfect victim, pregnant, working as a maid, living in a tiny apartment. She stopped in front of the photo shelf, picking up the portrait of Helen with Daniel, and with a dedicated accomplice. Henry observed the clash between the two women, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with Victoria's behavior. There was a calculated cruelty in her accusations that he had never noticed before. Enough, Victoria, he finally intervened. Nobody is plotting against me. Oh, so you've already decided to believe her, so quickly. Victoria placed the picture frame back on the shelf, with unnecessary force. And what about us? About everything we've built? We built on lies, he replied, realizing the truth as he spoke the words. You kept me isolated, filtered who could contact me, sabotaged Helen's career. What else have you done that I don't know about? Victoria's face hardened. I did what was necessary to protect us, to ensure you became who you needed to be without distractions from the past. Without distractions. Helen was my wife. I never asked you to destroy her. You didn't need to ask, Victoria retorted coldly. It was implicit the moment you chose to stay with me. A heavy silence fell over the apartment. Helen watched the exchange with a mixture of shock and belated understanding, finally seeing the extent of the manipulation that had ruined her life. Victoria opened the expensive purse she carried and took out a large envelope. I came prepared, obviously. She threw the envelope on the coffee table. Prenatal DNA tests. I don't trust tests done after birth. Too easy to manipulate. You can't be serious, murmured Helen, incredulous. Very serious. If you really are carrying Henry's child, you won't have a problem proving it, will you? Victoria smiled, victorious. And in the meantime, we have this. She withdrew another envelope from her purse, smaller and thinner. A generous offer for your discreet silence. Until the DNA results are ready, of course. Helen didn't even touch the envelope. You really think you can buy everything and everyone? I don't think, darling. I know. Victoria adjusted her purse on her shoulder and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned to Henry. You have 48 hours to resolve this situation. After that, I'll make my own decisions about the future of our foundation and our joint businesses. When the door closed behind Victoria, Henry and Helen remained silent for long moments. The apartment, which was already small, now seemed suffocating with the weight of threats and revelations. I'm sorry about that, Henry finally said. I had no idea. About the person you were sharing your life with? Helen completed. There was no accusation in her voice, just a deep sadness. Henry approached the window, watching Victoria's luxury car move away down the modest street. A feeling of clarity invaded him, as if he were awakening from a long and confusing dream. I need to find out what else she's done, he declared, determined. And I need to correct the mistakes I allowed to happen. Helen placed her hand protectively over her belly. What are you going to do now? First, ensure that you and the baby are safe, he replied, turning to face her. Victoria is dangerous in a way I never realized before. And I have the feeling that what we saw today was just the tip of the iceberg. A week after the confrontation in Helen's apartment, Henry found himself in his office, compulsively reviewing the evidence that Richard had gathered. The file, kept on an encrypted flash drive, contained compromising documents about Victoria's activities over the last 3 years. Emails exchanged between her and university directors confirmed the pressure for Helen's dismissal. Financial documents revealed a complex scheme of diverting funds from the Mendoza Price Foundation to shell companies. But most disturbing were the veiled threats directed at anyone who tried to reintegrate Helen into the academic job market. I can't believe I was so blind, murmured Henry to Richard, who remained standing beside the desk. She was extremely careful, sir. She used your name and influence but kept your signature away from any compromising document. Henry rubbed his face, exhausted. In recent nights he had barely been able to sleep. He maintained a facade of normality with Victoria, while secretly investigating the extent of her manipulations. And what about Helen's financial situation during this period? He asked, fearing the answer. Richard consulted his notes. After selling the house, she survived on small jobs. She gave private lessons for a while, but the rumors followed her. She tried to publish academic articles under a pseudonym, but without university affiliation, it was difficult. She went through significant hardships until she got the hotel job 5 months ago. Guilt consumed Henry. While he expanded his real estate empire and attended high society parties, Helen faced humiliation and privation, carrying his daughter. The intercom buzzed. It was his secretary. Mr. Mendoza, District Attorney Camilla, Sanders is here to see you. Henry exchanged a significant look with Richard. Send her in. Camilla Sanders, a woman of serious expression and firm posture, entered the office carrying a folder. Henry had known her for a long time, since the days when she had investigated some irregularities in the real estate sector, an investigation from which his companies emerged innocent. Thank you for receiving me without a prior appointment, she said, sitting in the offered chair. The matter is delicate and I preferred not to leave electronic records. I imagine you've analyzed the documents I sent, replied Henry, dismissing Richard with a nod. I have, and I must say they are extremely concerning. Camilla opened her folder. We have sufficient evidence to initiate a formal investigation into financial fraud, manipulation of public contracts, and misuse of philanthropic funds. And what about Helen's situation? Professional persecution is more difficult to prove legally, but the emails exchanged between Ms. Price and the Dean constitute strong evidence of undue interference. Camilla paused, studying Henry's expression. I should remind you, Mr. Mendoza, that although we haven't found your direct participation in these acts, you may face questioning for negligence as co-director of the Foundation. Henry nodded gravely. I'm aware and willing to bear the consequences. My priority now is to ensure that Helen receives justice and that Victoria is held accountable. Is there anything else I should know? Asked Camilla, noticing the hesitation in his gaze. Helen is 7 months pregnant. The child is my daughter. Camilla couldn't completely disguise her surprise. That complicates things personally, but doesn't alter the legal course of the process. She closed her folder. We intend to initiate formal procedures next week. Ms. Price will be officially notified. I suggest you prepare for the repercussions. After the prosecutor's departure, Henry remained seated, contemplating the city horizon through his office window. The company he had built with so much effort would certainly be affected by the scandal. Some contracts would be lost, investors would withdraw. But for the first time in years, he felt he was doing something genuinely right. His cell phone rang. It was Helen. I need to see you, she said with an urgent voice. Victoria was here again. I'm on my way, he replied, rising immediately. Inai. Helen's small apartment, Henry found Daniel, her former student and friend, already present. There was a palpable tension in the air. What happened? He asked, observing Helen's pale face. Victoria showed up an hour ago, explained Daniel, putting his arm protectively around Helen's shoulders. She brought this. On the table was a large envelope and a smaller one. Helen signaled for Henry to open them. The larger envelope contained a substantial amount of money, enough for Helen to live comfortably for several years. The smaller envelope contained documents, falsified medical reports suggesting psychiatric problems, adulterated records of professional misconduct, and even a forged paternity test, indicating that Helen's baby was not Henry's. She offered. Me a deal, said Helen, her voice trembling with indignation. The money in exchange for my disappearance. She said that if I didn't accept, she would use these documents to completely destroy me, that no one would believe the pregnant maid against one of the most powerful couples in the city. Henry felt his blood boil. And what did you answer? That she could shove the money and the documents where the sun doesn't shine, replied Helen, with a flash of the old temperament that Henry had known so well. I said I wasn't afraid of her. Daniel smiled with pride. You should have seen her face when Helen refused the offer. I think no one has ever said no to Victoria Price. She wasn't alone, continued Helen. There was a man waiting in the car, tall with a scar on his face. He looked dangerous. Henry frowned. Edward Burton works as a security consultant for some of our more sensitive projects. Victoria hired him 2 years ago. She mentioned that things could get unpleasant if I didn't cooperate, added Helen, instinctively protective of her belly. It wasn't an explicit threat, but yes, it was, Henry cut in, picking up the envelopes, and this, along with everything we've already discovered, is more than enough. At that moment, Daniel's cell phone rang. After a brief conversation, he hung up with a grave expression. That was my contact at the university. The dean has just announced his sudden resignation. He claims health reasons, but there are rumors of an internal investigation into external interference in academic decisions. Things are moving faster than I imagined, commented Henry. Camilla must have started to act. Who's Camilla? Asked Helen. A prosecutor. I delivered to her all the evidence we gathered about Victoria. Henry hesitated before continuing. Helen, in the next few days, everything will come to light. Your name will inevitably be mentioned. Are you prepared for that? Helen exchanged a look with Daniel before responding. I am. I've spent the last few years hiding in the shadows, as if I had committed some crime. I'm ready to reclaim my voice. What can I do to help? Asked Daniel. Continue being the friend you have been, replied Helen with a grateful smile. That's worth more than any fortune. Henry observed their interaction with a mixture of gratitude and something he recognized, surprised, as jealousy. Daniel had been by Helen's side when he had abandoned her. There was an intimacy between them that was born not of romance but of genuine loyalty. "We need a plan," said Henry, returning to the main subject. "Victoria won't back down easily. She has contacts, influence, and now she's cornered." "What do you suggest?" asked Helen. "First, you can't stay here. This apartment isn't safe." Henry paused. "I have a house in Clearwater that few people know about. You could stay there until everything is resolved." Helen hesitated. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "I'll go with you," Daniel promptly offered. "If you want, of course, you don't have to face this alone." The grateful look that Helen gave Daniel didn't go unnoticed by Henry. There was a story there, perhaps not romantic, but certainly significant. "And what about you?" Helen asked Henry. "What will you do about Victoria?" "I'll confront her," he replied simply. "With everything we've discovered, it's time to end this charade." At that moment, like a dark omen, all their cell phones rang simultaneously. They were notifications of a major breaking news. Upon opening them, they saw the headline that would change everything. "High Society Scandal, Mendoza Price Foundation investigated for fraud and persecution." The game had just changed drastically. The fall of the masks had begun, and nothing would be the same again. The chaos that followed the publication of the report was immediate. In less than an hour, Henry's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Concerned partners, eager journalists, lawyers offering services. Meanwhile, on social media, Victoria Price's name became the most commented topic, with hashtags ranging from "a philanthropic fraud" to "EU Justice for Helen." "All channels are echoing the news," commented Daniel, browsing on his tablet inside the house in Clearwater, where they had moved the night before. It was a spacious but discreet residence that Henry maintained for moments of reflection away from the city's bustle. Helen, seated on the sofa with an exhausted expression, absently caressed her belly. "It's strange to see my name in all these places, as if my story were an entertainment product for people." Henry, who had just ended a call, sat beside her. "The press office is trying to contain the damage, but this is bigger than any public relations strategy. Some outlets are already drawing parallels between your case and other possible abuses of power at the Foundation." "And Victoria?" asked Helen. "Any sign of her?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Henry hesitated before answering. "She's disappeared. She's not at any of our properties. The driver said he took her to the airport last night, but there's no record of her boarding under her name." Daniel frowned. "That's not good. Someone cornered. With resources is dangerous." The house intercom rang, making everyone jump. Henry answered cautiously. "Mr. Mendoza, it's District Attorney Camilla Sanders. I'm with a prosecution team." Minutes later, the prosecutor was seated in the living room, accompanied by two assistants who were taking discreet notes. Her countenance was grave. "Things have accelerated more than we anticipated," she explained. "An internal informant from the Foundation approached our team yesterday with additional documents. It seems the diversions were just the tip of the iceberg." Henry leaned forward. "What kind of documents?" "Evidence of blackmail against university board members, manipulation of bids in public projects, and—" Camilla made a deliberate pause. Looking at Helen, a detailed plan to neutralize Professor Castle after the divorce. "It was all meticulously orchestrated, gentlemen." Helen paled. "Why? What did I represent that was so threatening to her?" "According to the informant, Ms. Price saw you as the only link capable of reconnecting Mr. Mendoza to his past. You represented a version of him that she wanted to erase, the man before the current fortune, before the status she valued so much." Daniel, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. "And what about the recent threats?" Helen mentioned a man named Edward Burton. "We're trying to locate him," responded Camilla. "There's evidence that he's been involved in other episodes of intimidation on behalf of the Foundation. I strongly recommend that everyone remain in this safe house until we conclude the initial investigations." Camilla's expression became even. more serious. "Mr. Mendoza, I'll need your formal statement tomorrow, and Mrs. Castle," she turned to Helen, "your presence will also be necessary if you're in condition." "I'll be there," affirmed Helen with determination. "I've hidden for too long." After the prosecutor and her team left, a heavy silence hung over the three. It was Henry who broke it, rising abruptly. "I need to resolve something. I'll be back in a few hours." "Where are you going?" asked Helen, concerned. "Settling accounts with the past," he replied enigmatically, picking up his car keys. Daniel made a motion to follow him, but Helen stopped him with a gentle touch. "Let him go. There are things he needs to face alone." When Henry left, Daniel sat beside Helen. "How are you really feeling about all this?" She took a deep breath, placing her hands on her belly. "Honestly, exhausted, terrified, furious, and strangely hopeful." "Hopeful, yes," she smiled weakly. "For 3 years I lived like a shadow, doubting my own competence, questioning if I had imagined it all. Now I know I wasn't crazy. There's a validation in that, however painful the process." Daniel gently took her hand. "You were never a shadow. To me, Helen, you've always been the most brilliant professor I knew, the most principled person, the most loyal friend." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what would have become of me without you, Daniel. When everyone turned away, you stayed, and I always will," he assured, with a firmness that said more than words could express. Meanwhile, Henry drove through the city streets, his mind a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts. He finally arrived at his destination, the luxury penthouse he shared with Victoria. The doorman informed him that she had returned less than an hour ago. In the private elevator, Henry felt his heart accelerate, not from fear, but from the gravity of the confrontation he was about to have. When the doors opened directly into the apartment, he found Victoria calmly seated on the sofa, as if she had been waiting for him. She wore an elegant grey ensemble, impeccable hair, perfect makeup, the image of composure. "I figured you would. Come," she said without rising. On the coffee table, 2 wine glasses, one of them already served. "Would you like a drink for our last conversation?" Henry remained standing. "Where have you been?" "Resolving pending matters, as you must imagine." She took a sip of wine. "The newspapers are having a busy day, aren't they? Your ex-wife must be loving the attention." "It's over, Victoria. The prosecution has everything. The diversions, the blackmail, the plan to destroy Helen." For the first time, a slight tremor passed through Victoria's perfectly composed face. "An internal informant, I suppose? Fascinating how people quickly jump ship when they feel it's sinking. Why, Victoria? Why destroy the life of a woman who never did you any harm?" She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "You really don't understand, do you? Helen represented everything you could have been. A respected academic with a modest career, living an ordinary life. I saw your potential for much more. I needed to eliminate any anchor that might pull you back to that mediocrity." "So you admit it? Everything you did against her?" "I admit that I shaped the environment around us to maximize our opportunities." Victoria placed the glass on the table. "Do you think you would have reached where you are today if you had remained tied to that life, to that woman?" The calculated coldness with which she spoke left Henry astounded. For 3 years he had shared his life, his dreams, and his business with someone who was essentially a stranger. And her pregnancy. "Did you also plan a way to deal with that when you found out?" A dangerous gleam passed through Victoria's eyes. "An unexpected complication, I must admit, but nothing that a generous financial agreement couldn't resolve. I was surprised when she refused. People usually have their price." "Some people have integrity, Victoria, something you clearly don't understand." She then stood up with the studied elegance that had always characterized her. "Integrity doesn't build empires, Henry. Ambition does. Determination does." She approached him slowly. "Do you really think you can go back now? That you can erase the last 3 years? That woman carries your daughter, it's true, but I built your legacy." Henry took a step back. "My legacy isn't buildings or contracts, Victoria. It's what I leave for the people who really matter." How touching. The sarcasm in her voice was cutting. "And what about our business partners, the investors, the Politicians who facilitated our approvals in exchange for favors. Do you think they'll stay quiet while you play the repentant hero? I've already handed everything over to the prosecution. Everything, including the names, the dates, the values. For the first time, Victoria seemed genuinely alarmed. You wouldn't do that. It would destroy everything we've built. We built on lies, Victoria, on the destruction of an innocent person's life. She gave a bitter laugh. Please spare me the melodrama. Helen is no defenseless saint. She could have fought harder, could have confronted you directly. She chose to retreat to a corner and lick her wounds. Because you made sure she had no choice. Henry's voice finally rose. You isolated her, destroyed her reputation, cut off all her opportunities. A knock on the door interrupted the confrontation. It was two police officers accompanied by Camilla Sanders. Ms. Victoria Price, said the older officer. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of financial fraud, forgery, extortion, and criminal conspiracy. Victoria maintained her composure as she listened to the reading of her rights. Only when the handcuffs were placed on her wrists did She turned to Henry one last time. You think this ends here? That you can simply resume your life with a happy new family? Her smile was icy. Edward is still out there, and he's not the only one who knows how the game really works. As she was led out of the apartment, Camilla approached Henry. We received an anonymous tip informing us she would be here. Was it you? Henry shook his head. I had no idea she would return here. Well, that makes things easier. I'll need you to come to the station to give a formal statement. Camilla paused. And what about Edward Burton? Should we be concerned about that threat? Yes, Henry replied gravely, and we need to find him before he finds Helen. Back at A. The house in Clearwater, Helen and Daniel anxiously awaited news. When Henry finally returned, it was already late at night. Victoria has been arrested, he announced, looking physically and emotionally exhausted. But Edward Burton is still at large. The police are looking for him. What happens now? Asked Helen, visibly worried. Now we need to wait, Henry replied. The statement is scheduled for tomorrow. After that, the real process of rebuilding will begin. That night, the three remained silent in the living room, each lost in their own thoughts. The storm had begun to dissipate, but the waters were still far from calm. Daniel prepared tea for Helen, who finally fell asleep on the sofa, visibly exhausted by the day's events. Carefully, he covered her with a light blanket. You love her, don't you? Asked Henry, observing the gesture. Daniel didn't avert his gaze. Yes, since she was my professor at the university, but I never tried anything, even after you separated. She was devastated. She needed a friend, not a suitor. And now? Now? Daniel smiled sadly. Now she's carrying your daughter and is in the middle of a storm. I continue to be the friend she needs. Henry slowly nodded. A new respect born for this man who had done for Helen what he should have done, stood by her side in difficult times, without demanding anything in return. Thank you, he said simply, for taking care of her when I failed. Outside, the house, rain began to fall softly, washing the city of the tensions of the day. But even with Victoria arrested and the truth beginning to emerge, a shadow still hung over them. Edward Burton, the man who knew all the dirty secrets of the Foundation, was still somewhere out there, and as Victoria had warned, he wasn't the only danger. The public storm had only just begun, and the silence that would follow depended on how strong they could be in the days to come. 6 months had passed since Victoria Price's arrest. Her trial had become one of the most talked-about cases of the decade, exposing a complex web of corruption that extended across various spheres of power. The headlines that once highlighted the power couple now reported sentences, plea bargains, and the fall of previously untouchable figures. In a crowded courtroom, Helen adjusted the small bow on Sophie's little dress, her 3-month-old daughter. The baby slept peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the importance of that day. Are you ready? Daniel asked softly, seated beside her. As always, he was there, her safe harbor amid the turbulence. Helen nodded, watching Henry converse with his lawyers on the other side of the room. Although he hadn't been indicted as an active participant in Victoria's schemes, He faced questioning about his negligence as co-director of the foundation. The agreement he had negotiated with the prosecution included the return of funds, dissolution, of part of his business and community service. The judge entered the room and everyone stood. It was the last day of testimony before Victoria's final sentence. "The court calls Helen Castle for her final testimony," announced the clerk. Daniel gently took Sophie from Helen's arms. With firm steps, she walked to the witness stand. From there she could see Victoria seated next to her lawyers. Even after months of preventive detention, she maintained an impeccable appearance, although her eyes no longer conveyed the same arrogant confidence as before. "Professor Castle," began, "the judge, you have already testified previously about the events that led to your dismissal from the university and subsequent professional persecution. Today, I would like you to share with the court the personal impact of these actions on your life." Helen took a deep breath, looking directly at Victoria before beginning. "When I lost my position at the university, I didn't just lose a job. I lost my professional identity, my academic support network, my purpose. For months, I woke up not knowing who I was beyond the rumors about me." Her voice, initially trembling, gained firmness with each word. "I sold the house I received in the divorce to pay growing debts and medical treatment when I discovered the pregnancy. I worked as a waitress, receptionist, cleaner, not by choice, but by necessity." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the journalists, usually restless, watched with respect. "The worst wasn't the material poverty," continued Helen. "It was the loneliness. When your name is tarnished, people pull away. Old friendships evaporate. Invitations stop coming. You become invisible except as an object of gossip." Henry lowered his eyes, the guilt evident in his expression. He knew that, even without active participation, his omission had allowed it all to happen. "But there was light amid the darkness," said Helen, her gaze softening as it met Daniel's eyes. "People who remained by my side not out of interest, but out of genuine loyalty, who believed in me when I myself doubted. And then I discovered I was pregnant." Her eyes turned to little Sophie, asleep in Daniel's arms. "My daughter became my strength when everything seemed lost. For her, I found courage not to accept the money offered in exchange for my silence. For her, I decided it was time to reclaim my dignity, no matter the cost." Victoria maintained an impassive expression, but her fingers drummed nervously on the table, a rare sign of discomfort. "Your Honor," concluded Helen, "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because I believe that even the most painful truths need to come to light for healing to happen. What Ms. Price didn't just destroy my career. It diverted resources that could have benefited students, research, society as a whole. The real victim was public trust." After the testimony, while the judge announced a recess before the final sentence, Helen returned to her seat. Daniel handed her Sophie, who was beginning to wake up. "You were amazing," he whispered. From across the room, Henry observed the scene with a complex expression: admiration for Helen's strength, gratitude for Daniel's constant presence, and a growing love for the daughter he barely knew. The verdict was announced later that afternoon. Victoria Price was sentenced to 12 years in prison for multiple crimes, with the possibility of progression after serving 1/3 of the sentence. Additionally, she would have to pay substantial compensation to Helen and other victims identified during the process. Edward Burton, captured 2 weeks after Victoria's arrest, had negotiated a reduced sentence in exchange for detailed information about all the Foundation's schemes. His testimony had been crucial for tracking the diverted money. As they left the courthouse, a small crowd of journalists waited. Helen, now reinstated at the university with all honors and public apologies, had become a symbol of resistance against power abuses. "Professor Castle, how do you feel after the verdict? Henry Mendoza, will you get back together because of your daughter? Daniel Adams, is it true you refused the department coordination to support Professor Castle?" Helen raised her free hand, asking for silence. "Today is not about me or about personal relationships. It's about justice being done, not just for me, but for all. The people affected by these schemes, now please respect our privacy. My daughter needs to rest. With the help of security, they managed to enter a waiting car. Inside the vehicle, a comfortable silence settled. Helen adjusted Sophie in the baby carrier, while Henry and Daniel exchanged looks of mutual understanding. "Where to now?" asked the driver. Helen looked at the two men, one representing her past, another who had been by her side in the present. "Home," she replied simply. 2 months later, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, Helen watched Sophie playing on the living room rug of her new apartment. Smaller than the house she had during her marriage, but infinitely more welcoming. The walls displayed her recovered diplomas and new photographs, her with Sophie in the hospital right after birth, her returning to the university on her first day as a full professor, and a recent photo of the three, her, Daniel and Sophie, at a picnic in the park. The doorbell rang. It was Henry, punctual as always for his weekly visit with his daughter. "I brought something for you," he said, handing over an envelope. Inside were documents transferring ownership of a property, a small economic research institute. "What is this?" asked Helen, confused. "The Sophie Institute for Economic and Social Studies," explained Henry, "fully funded and with guaranteed autonomy. The board of directors will be formed by independent academics, and you will be the executive director. If you accept." Helen looked at Daniel, who seemed as surprised as she was. "Why?" "Because you always talked about creating a space where researchers could work without political or corporate pressures. And because—" Henry hesitated, looking at little Sophie. "I want our daughter to grow up, seeing that it's possible to rebuild something better from the rubble." Helen felt her eyes water. It wasn't just a gesture of generosity, it was a recognition of her professional value, something the old Henry had never truly appreciated. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "This means a lot." Henry approached Sophie, who smiled when she recognized him. In recent months, he had made efforts to build a genuine bond with his daughter, attending medical appointments, helping with care when Helen allowed. "How's business?" asked Daniel, breaking the silence. "Different," replied Henry. "Smaller, more focused. I ended questionable partnerships, even profitable ones. We're working more with social housing now, ironically." The "we" didn't go unnoticed. After the scandal, many executives had abandoned Henry's companies. Curiously, it was Richard, his faithful assistant, who assumed the role of operational director, bringing a more humane vision to the business. "And you?" Henry asked Daniel. "I heard you received an offer from Princeton." "I declined," Daniel replied simply. His gaze crossed briefly with Helen's. "I have reasons to stay." The dynamic among the three had transformed in recent months. What had begun as a potentially explosive situation, the powerful ex-husband, the pregnant ex-wife and the loyal friend, had evolved into something surprisingly harmonious, not through sugary romanticism or self-proclamations of modern family, but through mutual respect and for Sophie's well-being. Henry never tried to romantically reconnect with Helen, understanding that chapter was closed. Daniel never pressed for more than she was ready to offer, and Helen, for the first time in years, felt truly free to choose her own path. When Henry said goodbye that afternoon, promising to return the next Sunday, Helen and Daniel remained on the balcony watching the sunset while Sophie slept peacefully in her crib. "Do you think we'll ever tell her this whole story?" asked Daniel, carefully taking Helen's hand in his. "Yes, but not as a tale about villains and heroes," replied Helen, intertwining her fingers with his, a gesture still new but increasingly natural. "We'll tell it as a story about new beginnings, about how sometimes we need to lose everything to discover what really matters." At that moment, as the sky tinged with shades of pink and orange, Helen reflected on the extraordinary journey of recent years. From respected professor to anonymous, maid and now back to the academic world, but with a new perspective, an adored daughter and a man by her side who had proven his worth in the darkest moments. "You know what impresses me most?" she said, resting her head on Daniel's shoulder. "How the encounter at the hotel seemed like a terrible humiliation at that moment. Me pushing a cleaning cart while my ex-husband paraded with his new companion. But now I see it was the beginning of my liberation." Daniel gently kissed her forehead. Sometimes the universe has a strange sense of humor. In the room next door, Sophie slept peacefully, oblivious to the drama her existence had helped unravel. She would grow up knowing that her mother was a woman of extraordinary strength, that her biological father had found redemption, and that Daniel, who would legally become her second father a few months later, had been the silent pillar that had sustained everything in the most difficult moments. Helen Castle's life had been shattered and rebuilt, not in the old molds, but in an entirely new and unexpectedly beautiful form. And as she embraced Daniel under the twilight sky, she felt something she had forgotten was possible. Peace. The empire of appearances that Henry and Victoria had built crumbled, revealing its rotten foundations. But from the ruins, something genuine had emerged. It wasn't perfect nor free from scars, but it was authentic. And for someone who had lived so long in the shadow of lies, authenticity was the greatest treasure of all. "What do you wish for now?" Daniel whispered in her ear. Helen smiled, feeling truly fulfilled for the first time in years. "Nothing beyond what I already have. A healthy daughter, meaningful work, and someone who sees me as I really am. Not as a trophy, nor as a stepping stone for social advancement, just me." And as the first stars appeared in the night sky, Helen understood that her encounter in the lobby of that luxury hotel hadn't been the end of a story, but the beginning of another much truer one. A story where the real luxury wasn't in penthouses or jewels, but in recovered dignity and love that survives the harshest trials. 5 years had passed since Victoria Price's trial. On the rooftop of the newly inaugurated Sophie Institute for Economic and Social Studies, a children's birthday party was in full swing. Sophie, now 5.5 years old, ran among the guests with a slightly crooked princess tiara on the dark hair she had inherited from her mother. "Mom, Dad, Daniel said I can show everyone my new telescope after the cake," she shouted, pulling Helen by the hand. Helen smiled, adjusting her daughter's tiara. "After the cake and the birthday song. Agreed? Now go call your father Henry. He's been on that balcony talking on the phone for too long." Sophie nodded energetically and ran off toward the balcony. Helen watched tenderly as the girl interrupted Henry's call, pulling him by the hand with the natural authority that only a 5-year-old can exercise over a powerful executive. Henry immediately put away his cell phone, smiling and allowing himself to be guided back to the party by his daughter's small hand. "She has you wrapped around her little finger," commented Daniel, approaching Helen and putting his arm around her waist. After 3 years of marriage, the gesture still brought that comforting feeling of home. "She has all of us," corrected Helen, observing how Sophie now dragged Richard, who had become a constant presence in their lives and was practically an uncle to the girl. The room was full of people who represented the different phases of Helen's life. University colleagues, some employees from the old hotel where she had worked, including the supervisor who had always protected her, researchers from the institute, and Daniel's family members. It was a web of unlikely relationships, woven through even more unlikely circumstances. "Cake time," announced Daniel's mother, an energetic lady who had adopted Sophie as her heart's granddaughter from the first instant. Everyone gathered around, the table where a cake in the shape of the solar system waited, a reflection of Sophie's current obsession with astronomy. Henry positioned himself next to Helen and Daniel, forming a family semicircle behind the birthday girl. "Make a wish, darling," encouraged Helen as they lit the candles. Sophie closed her eyes tightly, concentrating intensely before blowing out all the candles at once, drawing applause from the guests. "What did you wish for?" asked Henry, curious. "I can't tell, Dad. Otherwise it won't come true," replied the girl with the seriousness of someone explaining a fundamental law of the universe. Later, after the guests had departed and Sophie finally fell asleep, exhausted after demonstrating her telescope to each person present, Helen, Daniel, and Henry sat on the Institute's terrace. It was a silent tradition of theirs, these moments of conversation at the end of important events in Sophie's life. "The dean told me. Victoria requested parole again," commented Helen, holding a glass of wine. "It was denied for the 3rd time." Henry nodded. "My lawyer informed me. Apparently she still refuses to show genuine remorse." "Does that surprise anyone?" asked Daniel rhetorically. After her conviction, Victoria had become a model prisoner in terms of behavior, but in the rare interviews granted, she maintained the posture of someone who simply played the game as everyone plays it. Her inability to recognize the harm caused weighed against her in each progression hearing. Edward Burton was released on parole last month, added Henry. Part of his agreement was never to work with private security or consultancy again. Do you think he represents any risk? Asked Helen, the old concern momentarily visible in her eyes. No, Henry replied firmly. He lost everything, even loyalty to Victoria. Besides, he added with a slight smile, Richard keeps an eye on him, just as a precaution. The silence that followed was comfortable, like that of people who don't need to fill every moment with words. The city sparkled below them, lights dotting the darkness like fallen stars. Sometimes I still have difficulty processing everything that happened, confessed Helen. How everything changed so radically in such a short time. Daniel took her hand, the simple gesture loaded with understanding. From pregnant maid to executive director of one of the most respected research institutes in the country. Someone should write a book about that. Please, no, laughed Helen. We've had enough media attention for a lifetime. It was true. Even 5 years later, reports occasionally emerged recalling the Mendoza Price scandal, usually when one of the politicians or businessmen involved in the larger schemes returned to the headlines. Helen had refused to give interviews or write memoirs, preferring to focus her time on the Institute and family. How are the new housing projects? She asked Henry, deliberately changing the subject. His face lit up. The transformation of his business had perhaps been the most surprising change of all, after losing various contracts and investors in the aftermath of the scandal. Henry had completely redirected his company, focusing on affordable housing and sustainable urban development. To everyone's amazement, including his own, he discovered a genuine passion for social impact projects. The complex in the East Zone will be inaugurated next month. 150 units, all with solar energy and water reuse system. And the best part, truly affordable prices for low-income families. Sophie is excited to cut the ribbon, commented Daniel. She's rehearsed her speech about 20 times. Henry smiled with genuine pride. She has a natural talent for speeches. Just like her mother. Helen shook her head, amused. Actually, I think she inherited your talent for negotiations. Did you see how she convinced Richard to build that elaborate treehouse in his backyard? The three laughed, sharing the simple pleasure of proud parents. The dynamic among them had solidified into something that surprised everyone who knew their story. Henry never tried to interfere in Helen and Daniel's marriage, deeply respecting the man who had stood by her side in the most difficult moments. Daniel, in turn, never prevented Henry's active participation in Sophie's life, recognizing the importance of that bond, and Helen found balance in a situation that many judged impossible. I received an interesting invitation today, Henry said after a moment. National University wants me to give a series of lectures on business ethics and corporate responsibility. Daniel almost choked on his wine. Sorry, but there's a certain irony there. Exactly what I said, replied Henry with a self-deprecating laugh. But maybe that's exactly the point. Who better to talk about the dangers of ethical negligence than someone who saw his empire crumble because of it? Helen observed the man before her, so different from the Henry she had known during their marriage, and almost unrecognizable compared to the ambitious businessman who had ignored her in that hotel lobby almost 6 years ago. The scandal, the near loss of everything, fatherhood. All these experiences had profoundly transformed him. I think you should accept, she said sincerely. Your experience has pedagogical value, and Sophie would be proud to see her father teaching others not to make the same mistakes. Henry seemed genuinely touched. Thank you, Helen. That means a lot coming from you. Daniel raised his glass in a silent toast, which the others accompanied. It was a gesture they had adopted over the years, mute recognition of battles won, bridges rebuilt, peace achieved. The next morning, while preparing breakfast, Helen observed through the kitchen window as Henry arrived to pick up Sophie for their weekend together. The girl ran into her father's arms soon as she saw him, showing him a book about constellations. Daniel came out shortly after, carrying his stepdaughter's small backpack with her belongings for the weekend. The three men talked briefly, Daniel handing over the backpack, Henry listening attentively to something Sophie was explaining, and Richard, who had come driving for Henry, crouched to be at the girl's height, apparently making some joke that made her laugh out loud. It was a picture that any outside observer would find unusual, knowing the complete story. Helen smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude. The path to here had been tortuous, marked by betrayals, humiliations, and pain, but also by discoveries, resilience, and, surprisingly, forgiveness, not the type that erases scars, but the one that allows them to integrate into the larger tapestry of life. Sophie waved enthusiastically from the car window as they departed. Helen waved back, feeling Daniel embrace her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on her shoulder. "About how unpredictable life is," she replied, leaning back against him. "About how sometimes the worst moments lead us to the best places." Daniel kissed her neck softly. "Are you talking about that day at the hotel?" "Yes. If someone had told me at that moment, when I felt so humiliated pushing that cleaning cart, that 5 years later I would be here." She left the sentence unfinished, the implications obvious. Life rarely follows a script, Daniel philosophized. Thankfully. Helen turned in his arms, looking directly into his eyes. "You know what Sophie told me she wished for when she blew out the candles yesterday, even though it's against the rules to reveal it?" "What?" She said, "I wished that our family would always stay like this, with 2 fathers who get along and a happy mother." Her exact words. Daniel's eyes shone with contained emotion. "Smart, our girl." "Yes," agreed Helen. "And somehow she understands better than many adults that family isn't about perfect structures, but about imperfect people who choose to love and respect each other, despite everything." That tranquil morning, as they finished preparing coffee together in the sunny kitchen, Helen thought about how destiny works in mysterious ways. An embarrassing encounter in the lobby of a luxury hotel had triggered a series of events that, although painful, led to a place of authenticity she never would have found otherwise. Her life was now intertwined with that of Daniel, Henry, Sophie, and so many others who had entered her journey at the most unexpected moments. A complex, imperfect, and beautiful web, exactly how life should be. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Helen, Henry, and Daniel has touched your hearts. The path from humiliation to rebirth reminds us that, even in the darkest moments, there is always a possibility of reconstruction and discovery of true value. To continue this journey of moving stories that reveal the complexity of the human soul, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating narratives. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like. Your comments are valuable. Tell us which moment of this narrative touched your heart the most, or what other stories you'd like to hear. Every day we bring new narratives that explore the nuances of life, revealing beauty where we least expect to find it. Don't miss our upcoming content and share with those who also appreciate profound stories about new beginnings and second chances. We await you in the comments to continue this conversation about the unexpected paths that life presents us.